next week, I'm going to be sending 7,000 emails per day, and I'm going to be documenting the whole process. See, this year alone, I've booked over 2,000 calls from cold email, but people still don't believe me when I say that it is the best way to generate leads. They honestly think that everything lands in spam, it takes too long to work, and that it could never compete with ads. However, to be honest, I completely disagree. Now I'm giving myself just 1 week to prove them wrong. As you can see here from Sid, we have a Let's Connect that came in 5 minutes ago. Scrolling up, would be happy to chat. What works for you next week? We have a thanks for reaching out. I lead BD at Silver Oak and can be your main point of contact. Let's hop on a call. And I'm going to be showing you everything live, including the messages I send, the replies I get, and every single dollar that it costs me. So by the end of this video, you'll know exactly whether or not cold email works, or if I'm honestly just burning money for nothing. I've mapped out everything that we need to pull this off. So real quick, exactly what we're gonna need. Obviously, step 1, we're gonna need to set up the infrastructure. Step 2, we're gonna need to get some leads. Step 3, we're gonna have to create an offer. Step 4, we're gonna have to write email copy, the follow-ups, Step 5, we're obviously gonna launch. And then step 6, we're going to check in on the results. Now, first things first, if you want to set up 7,000 emails per day without getting banned immediately, you can't just set up one domain. I need to make sure I build this out properly. So let me show you exactly how we're setting this up. All right, so let's just do some quick math here. Obviously, we want to send 7,000 emails per day. I'm going to focus on Outlook for this setup, specifically for 2 reasons. 1, we're seeing optimal results with Outlook right now. And 2, it's a little bit cheaper than sending from Google, which makes it a little bit of an easier choice when we're trying to hit this kind of volume right now. So with 7,000 sends, we are going to need, let's just do some quick math. So I'm going to be using mailer for this. 1 mailer order, which is Outlook, is 1 domain, and that equals 500 daily sends. So if we want to do 7,000 sends, that's going to be roughly 14 orders, which means 14 domains. So we're going to need 14 domains here, and that's going to be roughly 1,386 accounts because each order from mailer is 99 accounts. All right, so next thing we're going to want to do is buy some domains. We mentioned that we're going to need 14 in order to get this setup going through Outlook. So I'm going to recommend using the bulk search function here in Porkbun. Essentially what this means is you can add 14 domains at once, add them all to your cart if they're available. And obviously the only logical next step here is figuring out what those domains are going to be. So I always like to use ChatGPT for this. It just makes it really easy. So what I'm going to do is ask ChatGPT to create 14, I'm going to call them lookalike domains for Growth Flare. And for this specific campaign, we're going to be using .info domains. The reason why we use .info domains, especially because we're trying to hit volume, is that they're just a little bit on the cheaper side. You're always going to be better off using something like .com or .co, but usually what we'll end up doing, especially when we're trying to hit volume, is just use the cheapest domains that you can buy that don't inhibit deliverability. So if you start getting into the crazy ones like .xyz and all of those random suffixes that are super cheap, like 99 cents cheap, you're going to run into deliverability issues. But over a bunch of different tests, we've launched thousands of different campaigns. We've seen that .info perform almost as well as .co, and then obviously not as good as .com, but the quality drop-off is not as significant as the price drop-off. So obviously it makes it worth it for us. So we're going to just put growthflare.info here as an example. The one thing I like to do is you can do one of 2 things. 1, ask it to make very industry specific suffixes. So create 14 lookalike domains for Growth Layer. We want these to be short, 3 to 5 characters max. Prioritize suffixes. I always like to prioritize suffixes because when you put a word on the tail end of your domain still reads nicely left to right. So if you do something like try Growth Flare, it's a little bit odd, but if you do like Growth Flare Pro or something, it's easier to read your name in the front. That's really not necessary, but to be honest, it's just kind of like a habit of mine. Let's make these finance related. And then there's always a few things that end up getting thrown in there. So these need to be recognizable words, not these random acronyms that nobody's ever heard of. And then, so these are basically all the ones that I end up using, and we should be good to go from there. Cool. I'd say all of these are pretty recognizable. So we'll grab those, pull them into Porkbun, and see what we get. Sometimes you will find that they're taken, or at least a good percentage of them are taken. So you'll have to run the GPT again, but it's usually just a quick one or two. Cool. So luckily we got 13 out of 14. Add one more. Awesome. So now we're at 14 and we're just under $36. So I'm going to add that to our sheet here. All right, so now that we have our domains, we're going to have to jump in and purchase the inboxes. We're going to specifically use Mailer for this one. It's just a preference. It's one that we've been using for a while and we've tested out. Obviously, there's a bunch of different options, so feel free to use what you wish. But let's dive in. And again, we're using Outlook here. All you're going to have to do at this point is insert the domains that you purchased. We're going to click Add Domain. And you can add as many of them as you want. I'm just going to do one for this example, but you're going to want to add all 14 here. You're going to want to add the forwarding URL. So this is going to be the website that it redirects to. You're going to want to add display names. So exactly who you want the inbox to show up as. Once you have this set up, you're going to choose the inbox or the workspace rather that it's going to be sent to. And then from there, we're just going to click order and we should be good to go. All right, so just jumping back to our price sheet here, because obviously I want to keep this all tracked. So the mailer inboxes ended up equaling 14 times $99 roughly per order equals $13.86. So now we're at a total of $13.86 plus $35.98. So we're at $1421.98. And we'll just keep adding to this total as we go through. All right, and then the next thing you're going to want to do once the email accounts are loaded up into your workspace, as you can see here, we've got ours all set. You're going to want to set up the warming settings. So we're going to update our warming settings to 5 email sends per day. That's specifically for Mailer. Every single email provider is going to have, different recommended settings. So just keep an eye out for what they suggest to use. And usually that happens right after you order the inbox. But the nice thing is with a lot of these resellers or infrastructure providers is they'll actually provide every single step of the process complete for you. So all of the tedious like DNS, DMARC, SPF, DKIM, so on and so forth, everything that needs to be done on the back end to make sure that you actually land in the primary inbox is done before you even load up the email accounts into your workspace. So that's all done for you. All you have to do, submit the order. Once it's received, add the warm-up settings. Sometimes they're preset for you. Again, depends on the provider, but you're going to want to double check. And then pretty much from there, it's just a waiting game. You're going to want to wait 2 weeks, make sure that they warm up sufficiently before doing any sending. All right, so now we've got everything set up. We have our 14 mailer accounts with 14 domains, 1,386 email accounts, and that is roughly going to cost us $1,400, 35 of that being one time, and almost 1,400 of that being monthly. But without people to actually email, all of that money is going to go to waste. And this is obviously the hardest part because we need to find 7,000 people to email per day. Now for this campaign, I picked a few subcategories of the finance niche because I already know the industry pretty well. And I know a few different directions that we can go for it. Problem is there's obviously like tens, if not hundreds of thousands of finance companies out there. So we really need to get specific about who we want to target and who's going to be relevant for the offer. So here's how we'll probably go about filtering it down. All right, so most people just jump into a platform like Apollo or Sales Navigator at this point, but I'm going to be pretty strategic and smart about it. So what I usually like to do is jump into ChatGPT and have it help me come up with the criteria for Apollo. As you know, with Apollo, there's tons of different filters and, different industry categories that we can leverage to be able to find the types of prospects that we're looking for. But to be honest, the best way to really stack the number of keywords and be specific about exclusions and inclusions and things like that is by using ChatGPT. So I'm going to use a simple prompt like this. I want you to come up with a search criteria for private equity companies, maximize keywords provided so we can pull a large number of prospects, share in comma separated format. And that's just, Apollo's preferences for formatting. And it's going to be a little bit of trial and error. So we'll start here. We'll go into the people tab and we are going to look at keywords. We're going to include keywords and we're going to drop those in there. Now we see we're at 13 million. Obviously we can't target 13 million people with the infrastructure we've set up. So let's boil it down to US. Now we're at 3.8. We'll do location for both the account, which is where the actual company is located, and the person, which is where the person is located, as US. And then what we're going to want to do is jump into some job titles. So let's go back to ChatGPT and say what job titles would be relevant for a offer around lead generation deal flow. Awesome. So same deal. We're just going to grab these job titles, and you might want to take a look into these as well. You know, if you understand the space, you'll know whether or not this is accurate. If you don't understand the space, maybe do some more prompting. Just ensure that it is, the people that you're looking to reach out to. But I've targeted these companies tons of times before, so I already know that a lot of these are pretty good. Awesome. So we're just chiseling away, just under 600K. Now let's filter out the smaller companies, so we know that we're only reaching out to those that have money. And then we probably want to avoid the larger companies, as to stick with those that aren't dealing with the service in-house. So I might, even for this specifically, drop down into this range here. I think that's kind of the sweet spot for those that might be looking for external help. Obviously, you can go up a little bit higher, but I think that's pretty good for now. And then the one thing that I'll also recommend is just going through the search, double checking each one of the companies that come through, just seeing if they really fit the company description that you're looking for. And then if they don't, that's when you're going to want to go back into keywords and really start adding exclusions. The common things we'll see in this space are SaaS companies, so softwares will come up. And I might even go back just for the sake of this video and show you some keywords around software. Cool. So we're actually going to use the industry filter to exclude some of these software companies. So computer software, information, tech. We'll do internet, cloud computing, and computer. Looks like that one doesn't exist. Computer software. Perfect. So we have roughly 43.6 thousand prospects at this point. If we do the math and we're running 7,000 leads per day, we're going to do this for roughly a week. And that means we're going to need about 35,000 prospects to send to in that week. Given that once we verify these, there'll probably be some drop off. I think the 43,000 is probably good to go. And what we'll probably see is a pullback into the 30,000s once that's verified and cleaned up. So I'm just going to roll with this for now, and we'll take it from there. All right, so just pulling everything again into the doc here. We obviously focused on the finance space, private equity specifically for now, a bunch of qualification keywords that we're going to be focusing on, and then we ended up with 43.6K pre-verification. Now, if you run a B2B business and you want to launch a campaign just like this without having to spend hours doing it, you can book a call via the first link below. We'll set up the targeting strategy, we'll write all the email copy, and we'll create the entire outbound infrastructure for you, just like I'm doing here. So if you want to see if we can help, you can book a call below. But either way, now we need to get all of these emails out of Apollo. However, purchasing a subscription and scraping, 40, 50,000 leads is going to be really expensive. So to save some money, I'm going to be using a tool like Ample Leads. All right, so with Ample Leads, all you have to really do is drop the Apollo search URL into their scraper. So you're going to put this here, and then you're going to want to include the number of leads that you've selected. So I believe we had 43,600. So we'll do 43,600. And if you don't have enough credits, obviously you're going to have to go in and purchase those. Just quickly, if you want to take a look at the pricing, it ends up costing around $1.20 per 1,000 leads, depending on which plan you're on. So let's go ahead and put that back into our pricing sheet. All right, so doing the math, around 43,000 leads at $1.20 per 1,000 is going to cost us around $56. So that brings our total up to $1478.68. All right, so now we have all of the raw data from Apollo, but it was obviously a mess. Some company names were inconsistent. There was LinkedIn profiles missing, some names here and there. So we obviously had to clean all of that up. And to do that, we used Clay. So essentially with Clay, I went from left to right, saw the information that we were missing, and then filled it in depending on what we needed for the specific campaign. So I used a formula to create full name out of first name and last name. We pulled domains here. We took the company names and normalized them to remove things like LLC or Co. or Inc. in case we wanted to use them in the copy. There was a few profiles which didn't have LinkedIn's, so we ended up looking for those using Clayagent, and then obviously ran it through Million Verifier to make sure that all of the emails were verified before sending. And then lastly, added a few tasteful personalizations. So for this one, without getting too deep into it, we pulled a company summary. we pulled the investment criteria of the private equity firm, and then we pulled their target industry. So these are 3 different personalizations that we're going to be putting together to, create a strategy for the copy itself. The one thing you'll have to focus on as well, which I haven't done yet, is just come up with a fallback for some of the personalizations which don't have information there. So actually you can see I have done it for this one here. So where target industry is not found, we have the output as in your industry. That way it's not, just blank. But you'll have to figure that out for every single one of the personalizations that you run because you're not always going to have data. Now, the cost for some of these enrichments in Clay is going to vary a lot depending on which model or LLM that you're using to come up with the information. So for us specifically, we use ChatGPT 4o Mini because we find it's the cheapest, gives us the best results. And you can see here, depending on which that you use, it can cost, next to nothing. So this one was specifically 0.00014 per row. We ran that on 10,000 rows so far. Obviously we have, 20, 30,000 more that we have to set up there, but you can roughly do the math. So 0.00014 times 10,000 is roughly $1.40. And then we ran a few other models here. These ones are a little bit more expensive. 0.001 times 10,000 roughly cost us $10. So let's say roughly we spent around $22 on enrichments, and we'll add that to the list. So now we're at $1,568. And look, I know this sounds expensive, but we're just about to find out if this is worth it or if I wasted all of this money. And we definitely won't make it too far without having a really strong offer. You see, my service in essence is lead generation, and everybody says that they do lead generation. So instead of leading with a pitch and getting, drowned in a sea of the same with everybody else, we need to come up with something that's going to be super enticing on the front end. This will be like a front end offer, essentially like a free campaign or a free audit, something valuable that they'll actually reply to. So if you don't already have a front end offer, you're probably going to want to run through ChatGPT and just come up with something that works really well for your industry. If you haven't watched my video already, I have one that covers this exact thing. But basically what we did, we just asked for a description of a front-end offer. And then once we got the description, we asked for a few examples in our industry specifically. And we also emphasized that we wanted to lead into the core offer. So the front-end offer would almost be like a natural transition point from the initial piece of free work to the actual core offer itself, which reduces any sort of sales resistance. If you're providing something free up front, then they're not going to be hesitant to jump on and have a conversation with you. And then again, it naturally leads into that sales process. You're able to find a few different things and issues regarding what they had set up originally and poke holes in that, position yourself as the solution. So this is the search history of what I came up with last time. There's a bunch of different offer solutions here. But for ours, it's super simple. We're just going to run a free campaign for these guys because it gives us an idea of whether or not our system is going to work. And we can do it for relatively cheap. And there's no better offer than running something for free. All right, so if you haven't come up with a front-end offer before, I'd recommend doing some research through ChatGPT. This is a previous search history that I used to come up with a couple front-end offers for a few different clients of mine. But essentially what you're going to want is something simple, clear, quick win, low cost, relevant, and pain point driven, and naturally leads to the core offer. So what we normally do with each client is go through some rigorous ICP research, understanding each one of the different personas, the main pain points, the things that they're really struggling to solve right now. And then we position the front end offer as a direct solution for those things. And then again, naturally leading to the core offer. So in a lot of cases, this ends up being some sort of audit or something that really allows us to get under the hood and see where they might be doing things wrong or where there's just some opportunities for improvement. That way we can position our core offer as a direct solution to that. In this case, we've already run campaigns to private equity firms before. We really know what makes them, take action or come to a conclusion on things. And for us, they really just want to know that it works. They have no problem paying for opportunities coming through, but they just want to know that this system works. And in our case specifically, we don't mind doing that because we obviously benefit from economies of scale. So we're able to set things up fairly cheap, get it going on the front end just to get that initial interest and really spark that interest. So I'm going to put here on the offer side, we're going to be doing a free outbound proof of concept. If you don't want to go completely free for your offer, you can always try doing things discounted too. Again, it ends up being like this lever game where you're really just tightening and untightening the resistance to say yes to what it is that you're offering. So obviously free, you're going to get a ton of people interested, but you have to put in a ton of work filtering for the right qualified prospects on the back end, or you can really tighten things, increase the resistance, and you just won't get as many interested responses. But in my mind, it's always the best direction, realistically, just to open the floodgates and then qualify prior to the call. If you really want to mitigate risk when you're launching your campaigns, you'll also want to try and come up with a few different types of offers. So like in this case specifically, we have the free outbound proof of concept, which is going to be our front end offer. But you might also want to come up with asset-based lead magnets, something like an overview document or videos explaining your services, things like that. Those can be used in, follow-up emails, or they could be used as A/B tests to see which ones perform better. Again, the goal is just going to be to reduce the resistance on the front end, make it an easy yes, something that sounds super valuable, no reason why they say no. But now we obviously need to turn this into a message that we can send. So for subject lines, I will repeat this until the day I die, but they really don't matter as long as it doesn't look salesy or doesn't have any sort of obvious sales resistance added to it. Doesn't look like a marketing email. You should be good to go. We use a lot of things like FYI, and then we'll use their first name. You could use deal idea, just something that's like vague, leaves a lot open to their imagination and just creates curiosity, gives them a reason to open the email. I've even seen some people use something as simple as email as the subject line. So realistically, like any of these work, it really doesn't have to be something crazy. And the only real rule with subject lines is, again, just don't put everything there. You don't want to give them everything. You want them to actually want to open up the email to respond. All right, so normally when we start with a client, what I would do is use their onboarding form or some sort of campaign brief that has a ton of information about their offer, who they target, previous client results, basically everything that there is to know about the company itself in one unified document. And I'll bring that into a tool like Claude and then leverage all of our best performing email scripts in the project file. That way you can ideate different offers, different ways of positioning the email based on what you've seen work really well with all of your previous clients in different industries, and include everything that the current client is doing, or like everything about their offer and their case studies and so on. What I'm going to do in this case specifically, because I've already gone in and I've created the personalizations, I already had a pretty good idea of what I wanted to leverage in the copy, is I just wrote these manually. So with the personalization, this whole section here is basically going to be AI personalization. And then the second line is just going to be the offer. I'm going to make these emails super, super simple. There's a ton of crackdowns right now from Outlook and things like that. And they're just making it very strict when it comes to landing in the primary inbox. So the goal with all of the emails that we're writing is just making it super simple, super casual, not overly salesy. Basically like a message that could be from, a coworker or someone internal, or even, like a partner at another business or something along those lines. Basically eliminating any sort of spam and just putting the offer out there in front of them. So in this case, it ends up being a relevance-based first line and then directly into the offer. And as you can see, this should actually be 1B. We'll have one version that offers the free proof of concept. That's the free campaign. And then we'll run a second version that's going to be an overview video. Again, this kind of gives us some back and forth to really test and see what's going to perform well. I would say when we launch a campaign with a client, we'll usually test a lot more significantly different variations because we don't necessarily know what works yet. But once we really have figured out a niche and figured out an offer and really understand the audience, we can do all of these minor, like micro optimizations to really see what's going to resonate the most, because we already know the overall structure that works. So in this case, again, we're running this AI personalization and we're pulling that from here. So you can see we have the company summary of each prospect, the investment summary. So based on the information on your website, you guys seem to be primarily investing in founder-led businesses. And that's based on a few different things here. So investment criteria, company summary. And then we also have target industry. So it's going to be like the healthcare industry or the tech industry. And we're going to leverage that in email too. Now, obviously, we're going to need follow-ups because people don't always reply to the first email. And the way I like to look at follow-ups, especially in this era of very short messages, with the one-liner and things like that. The second line, or the second email rather, should always just be an elaboration on the first thing. So when it comes to the first email, if it's very curiosity inducing, a little bit vague, but very like value driven, sometimes they think that it's interesting, but the question is like, what's the catch, or like what is this actually? So with the second email, the goal is always going to be to elaborate on that, add an extra piece of information or two that maybe you kept out of the first line. I would say in the past, second emails have always been a little bit harder to write, but because we're keeping the first email so minimal, it's really easy just to take the second or third thing that you would have liked to include in the first email and use those as follow-ups. In this case, we kept the casual tone. So you can see here, I didn't even use first name at the beginning. I said apologies first name. That last note might have been a bit vague. You could, make this a little bit less formal. That last note might have not been clear. If we had a platform, I think this is Spintax. So if we had a system that could source off-market opportunities for you in the, healthcare industry, the tech industry, or whatever, that have validated their EBITDA, this is important to them. They want to know that the business is actually, one that's worth purchasing and that they're prepared to exit. So basically, this is their dream scenario. Like if a company came to them in their ideal industry, they were like perfectly validated for revenue, debt, so on and so forth, and they wanted to sell, that's money for them. So there's no reason why they'd say no. Again, this is just driving that home. And generally, we leave it at 2 emails. You could include a third. Sometimes we like to add, a third point, or if you want to split up the thread and really like start fresh on a new offer, you could do that in email 3. Or we've seen things like breakup emails where you say, maybe you're not the right person to reach out to about, X, Y, and Z type thing. Is there someone else that I could chat to about this? Try things like that. For this, because we're hitting such large volume, I'm going to keep it to 2 so we could focus on more net new prospects. All right, so now with all of that done, this is obviously a big moment as we launch the campaign. What you're going to want to do is make sure that everything is set up properly. So double check your leads, make sure they're all in there, make sure all of the personalizations copied over, make sure your sequences are set up. You're going to want to Spintax these as well. If you don't know what Spintax is, you can pretty much just use ChatGPT and ask it to Spintax your copy, but it'll create a bunch of different variations that maintain the same idea. That way, there's, instead of one exact email going out to thousands of people, you have thousands of different variations based on these little micro tweaks to words. And that just helps with deliverability. And again, AI personalizations and things like that are going to help with the same idea as Spintax as well, because each email ends up being one-to-one. So again, just double checking, make sure your personalization comes through. Same thing with here, make sure the personalization comes through. And then with the follow-ups, perfect. So that all looks good. You're going to want to set the schedule. We usually do 8 to 5. Go into the settings, make sure everything's plain text. We're going to want to change this to 7,000 emails per day just to make sure we can hit our max. And then we're going to load up all the sender emails. And pretty much from there, you're just going to want to launch. And that's going to process. And just like that, we are launched. You're obviously going to want to focus on keeping an eye on the inbox, managing the replies within 5 minutes of them coming in, getting to those really quickly, and then focusing on some of the stats. So looking at reply rates anywhere between like 1 to 3% would probably be solid to start. And then, you want your positive response rate anywhere between, we'll aim for somewhere between like 7 to 15%. I'd say that's where you see the average, at least in Email Bison, because of the way that they calculate metrics. But obviously could be much higher depending on the front end offer. Regardless, over the next couple of days, I will be keeping an eye on everything, and I'll be checking back with you guys to share the results. All right, so as promised, I wanted to walk you through a couple of the responses that are starting to flow in as we launch the campaign. So today it is October 15th. We launched the campaign on October 13th, and we just had a reply come in a few minutes ago. So I'll show you that one real quick. And then we also had a few flow in the last couple of days, so I'm going to show you those as well. As you can see here from Sid, we have a Let's Connect that came in 5 minutes ago. Scrolling up, would be happy to chat. What works for you next week? We have a thanks for reaching out. I lead BD at Silver Oak and can be your main point of contact. Let's hop on a call. And we have a thanks for reaching out. At your convenience, please send some time slots. And then those are from some previous campaigns above, but basically, ever since we launched, we have 1, 2, 3, 4 really, really hot responses that have come through that aren't even really objections. They're straight up just asking for a time to meet. So these should book any time now. I've obviously gone through and connected with all of them on LinkedIn just to push the meeting forward, but we'll see how they progress from there. All right, so just wanted to walk you through a couple of these responses and how we'd handle them specifically. As I'd mentioned, this one from Sid just came in, so we can go through the reply live. And what I wanted to show you guys is that, this doesn't have to be complicated. One of the things I see most people do is really fumble opportunities that are pretty much like touchdowns. So if there's a situation like this where someone is straight up just like, let's connect, all you have to do is share some times to meet. You don't have to go in and, repitch, like they're already sold on the idea. So for this one specifically, I would just say, great, Sid, here's my calendar if it makes it easier to coordinate a time. Best. Again, there's no objection, so there's nothing to handle here. All you have to do is give them the next steps. And as you can see, here's the full thread. They obviously responded to the angle that focused on the personalization up in that first line. So we'll send that off, and again, we'll see if they book. One thing I'll also do with the reply as it comes in is push it to a subsequence. This way, if he doesn't book, if he doesn't actually schedule in the next couple of days, we'll hit him with a few reminders, just to keep it top of the inbox. Obviously, he was interested. We don't want to lose this lead, so this will obviously ensure that. So we're going to add him to the follow-up sequence, and then I'll take a look at a few of the other responses that came in just to give you guys an idea of what these threads look like. So here's another one that came in from John. Again, same angle that ended up working here, the personalized first line, a little bit of like a curiosity-based offer on the back end. And again, this was like teed up for a home run. He just said, would be happy to chat. What works for you next week? And all we really did was provide the calendar link. Again, not over objection handling or over handling the response. If we're already at the finish line, no sense in getting cute with it. So again, just provided the calendar link, added them to the subsequence, and then we're just waiting on the response to book. And then just a third example here, just again, driving the point home. You can see here, we actually ended up hitting the wrong person. So we reached out to Dan with our main angle, focused on like their specific targeting criteria, and then the elusive, curiosity inducing offer. And we actually got a response from somebody else who was Annie, who leads business development at the company. You're going to see a lot of these situations where, you reach out to one person, you get passed off to another. But either way, again, happy to hop on a call to discuss any areas of overlap. Let me know what your schedule looks like end of October, early November. So this one's going to be a little bit later on. And then again here, maybe we just handled this one a little bit differently because it was a handoff, looking forward to getting acquainted. If it makes it easier, blah, 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 blah. Here's the calendar. Let's get that booked in, push them to the follow-up sequence, connect with them on LinkedIn, and then we'll see what happens from there. All right, so just wanted to rock another quick update on the private equity campaign that we launched the other day, hitting 7,000 people per day. Obviously, the interested responses were rolling in. We saw that on the last update. We got another one yesterday, which is obviously pretty good here. He was looking for a bit of a teaser. This one was a little bit less warm, but you can see some of these other ones. Obviously, sounds interesting. Can you say more? Let's connect. Feel free to share. Would be happy to chat. Tons of really, really warm leads were coming through. But the best part, I would say, on the updates from yesterday is that we had the first one book in. So this one here, I believe, Telegraph Hill Partners, you can see in the bookings channel, we had one of their employees, Paul Grossman, book in. It looks like they fudged the qualification answers, which is surprisingly more common than you think. People don't want to share their information prior to chatting, but it is all good. I did some background research. Looks like they're a really solid company and doing far better than 0 to 30K a month, but we'll see how that one goes. Obviously, with all of those other hot leads, I think they'll start trickling in through. Just based on the way that they position their responses, the intent was really, really high with what they were saying. And I imagine it's just a matter of the subsequences kicking in, reminding them to schedule in to really get those conversations on the calendar. All right, so just wanted to do a quick recap as well as we wrap up the week. So obviously the goal was to send 7,000 emails per day and see what the results were from that. You can see here we just about hit that at 33,000 emails total sent, just under 27,000 prospects reached. You can see here, volume dwindled a little bit to wrap up the week, but there was a few days where we oversent. So obviously that averaged out. What we ended up seeing here was 231 replies. And of those 231 replies, we had 16 that were interested. I just double checked. We had about 5 of those 16 book in so far, which is a little low. And as you can see here, the reply rate was a little low too. KPI would probably be somewhere between like 1.5 and 3%. I think we hit some issues with some of the infrastructure that we set up last week, which is bound to happen. But the nice thing with cold email as a mechanism is, like, regardless of the adversity that happens, if you're hitting deliverability issues, reply rate drops, when you're hitting this type of volume, you can still get some really solid results out of it. I mean, like, a 0.87% reply rate is about like half of KPI. So you can see on a good week, we're almost doubling these results, if not more than that, because, that's 1.5 is kind of like the minimum. If we got up to 3%, obviously we're tripling what we see here, which is awesome on the week. And again, 16 interested responses in 1 week from a campaign. You have maybe 50% of those book a meeting. Those are no small numbers. That's still really solid. It can generate some solid revenue, especially given the amount that we had to invest into this system for the month. It really isn't too much when you factor that in. If you have a decent sales system in place and you're closing anywhere between, like, let's say even the worst case, 10, 15% of those meetings, if not up at KPI between 20 and 30%, you're easily closing 1 or 2 deals out of that entire thing. That's compensating for the initial spend, no problem. So the question now is, does cold email actually work in 2025? And I think the answer is absolutely. But it's obviously not just about volume. It's about having the right setup, targeting the right people, and handling the responses the right way. But that obviously takes some time to master. So if you want us to handle the whole system for you, just like we did for our client who booked 47 calls in just 45 days, you can schedule a meeting with me below. Or you can watch this video where I show you the exact process that we use to help them out.